Two people can eat almost the same meals, walk roughly the same number of steps, and sleep about the same number of hours, and still end up with completely different bodies. Same life, different belly. And the difference is rarely about willpower. It is usually about a handful of small daily mechanisms that one person is quietly using and the other has never even heard of. Here is what most people never notice. The habits that shape how your body stores fat around your midsection are not dramatic. They do not look like discipline. They look like ordinary moments in an ordinary day, handled slightly differently. In many Japanese households, a set of everyday habits around eating, movement, rest, and stress has existed for generations, not as a diet plan, but simply as the normal rhythm of life. Nobody sat down and designed it as a health strategy. It grew out of culture, geography, and necessity. But several of these habits line up closely with what modern research understands about visceral fat, the fat that gathers around your organs and abdomen, and why it accumulates more easily under certain conditions than others. Today, we are going through 5 of these habits. Some are about food, some are about movement. One is about something you probably associate with relaxation, not weight, and it might be the most overlooked one on this entire list. Stay with me, because the habit at number 4 is the one most people resist. Not because it is difficult, but because it goes against almost everything they have been told about how to lose weight. And after the final habit, I will give you a simple daily sequence, no gym, no special ingredients, that pulls all 5 ideas together into one routine you could realistically start tomorrow morning. This is the Japanese Reset, where we explore small Japanese ideas that can make everyday life calmer, cleaner, and more intentional. Let's start with the one hiding in plain sight on your plate. Number 1, eating until you are full, instead of eating until you have had enough. Be honest, most modern eating culture is built around finishing what is in front of you. A full plate, a full portion, a takeout container designed to be emptied. Fullness, the sensation of your stomach visibly and physically stretched, has quietly become the signal that tells most people when to stop eating. The problem is that fullness is a delayed signal. Your stomach can stretch and continue accepting food well before your brain has caught up with how much you have actually consumed. There is a real biological lag between eating and the point where your body registers satisfaction, sometimes estimated at around 15 to 20 minutes. If you eat quickly, you can easily pass your body's actual requirement before the signal even arrives, and by the time it does, you are already well past it. In many Japanese households, there is a well-known cultural guideline called Hara Hachibu, most closely associated with the traditions of Okinawa, which roughly translates to eating until you are about 80% full. It is not a strict rule enforced with measuring tools. It is a mindset. Stop eating while there is still a small amount of room left, rather than eating until the plate is empty or your stomach feels tight. The mechanism behind this is not mysterious. If you consistently eat slightly less than your body's absolute maximum capacity at each meal over weeks and months, that consistently lower intake can meaningfully affect your overall caloric balance, which is one of the central factors associated with fat storage, including around the abdomen. This is not about restriction or deprivation, it is about redefining what enough actually means. Slow down here, because the practical action is almost embarrassingly simple. At your next meal, eat as you normally would, but pause about 3/4 of the way through your plate. Put your utensils down, wait 2 full minutes. Ask yourself honestly whether you are still hungry or whether you are simply continuing out of habit. Most people, the first time they try this, discover they were already satisfied several bites earlier than they realized. The shift is simple: stop eating for the plate and start eating for your body's actual signal, even if that signal arrives a little later than you expect. There is also a quieter piece of this habit worth mentioning because it changes how the entire meal feels, not just how much of it you eat. Eating slightly less than a full stomach tends to pair naturally with eating more slowly, since there is no urgency to clear the plate before the next task pulls your attention away. In many Japanese households, meals are treated as their own dedicated moment, not something consumed at a desk or in front of a screen while attention is split elsewhere. This matters biologically as well as mentally because the act of chewing thoroughly and eating without distraction gives your digestive signals more time to actually reach your brain before the meal is finished. You do not need to turn every meal into a formal ritual, but consider removing one distraction from just one meal a day: the phone, the television, the open laptop, and simply eating. Most people who try this notice almost immediately that they eat less without trying to, and that the meal itself feels more satisfying, not less. Number 2, walking as transportation, not as a workout. Picture the average modern day: a drive to work, an elevator instead of stairs, a car to the grocery store, then back home, then perhaps a scheduled hour at a gym in the evening if there is time and energy left. Movement has been compressed into a single isolated block, surrounded on all sides by long stretches of sitting. In many Japanese cities, particularly dense urban areas, walking is simply built into the architecture of daily life. Train stations require walking to reach platforms, grocery trips are often on foot because stores are close by. Errands accumulate small amounts of walking throughout the day rather than being replaced entirely by short car trips. None of this is labeled as exercise, it is simply how the day moves. Here is the biological piece most people overlook. Long periods of continuous sitting are associated with reduced activity in an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which plays a role in how your body processes and stores fat. When you sit for hours without interruption, this process slows down, and research suggests this may contribute to fat accumulation over time, independent of whether you also exercise later in the day. In other words, 1 hour at the gym does not fully cancel out 10 hours of uninterrupted sitting. The pattern of movement across your whole day may matter as much as the intensity of any single workout. This connects to a Japanese concept sometimes referred to as sampo, an unhurried walk taken simply for its own sake, without a fitness goal attached to it. It is not about burning a specific number of calories. It is about movement being woven into life, rather than scheduled as a separate effortful task. The practical shift does not require a treadmill or a gym membership. Look at your existing day and find 3 natural opportunities to walk instead of ride, even briefly. Park further from the entrance. Take 1 flight of stairs instead of the elevator. Walk to a nearby errand instead of driving. None of these individually feel significant. Together, distributed across a week, they can meaningfully increase how much your body moves outside of dedicated exercise time. Try this tomorrow. Choose one habitual short car trip and replace it with a walk instead, even if it takes 10 extra minutes. Notice how different your energy feels afterward compared to sitting in a car for the same distance. There is a broader concept worth understanding here, sometimes referred to in research as non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or the energy your body burns through everyday movement that is not formal exercise: standing, walking to a train, carrying groceries, climbing a short flight of stairs. For many people, this category of movement, spread quietly across an entire day, may account for a meaningfully larger share of daily energy expenditure than a single hour at the gym. This does not mean formal exercise is unimportant. It means that a day filled with small, frequent movement can support your goals in ways a single workout, surrounded by 10 hours of sitting, cannot fully replace. If your daily life currently involves long, uninterrupted stretches at a desk, one additional strategy worth trying is standing or walking briefly, for even 1 or 2 minutes every hour. This will not replace a dedicated walk or workout, but it interrupts the biological slowdown that comes with extended, unbroken sitting. And over the course of a full day, those small interruptions add up. Number 3. Fermented and vegetable forward meals as a daily default, not an occasional health trend. In many Western diets, meals are often built around a large central protein, refined starches, and vegetables treated as a smaller side addition, if they are present at all. Fermented foods, when they appear, are usually framed as a trendy supplement rather than an everyday staple. Traditional Japanese meals, by contrast, often place smaller portions of protein alongside a larger proportion of vegetables, rice, and fermented foods such as miso and pickled vegetables, eaten as an ordinary part of the meal rather than a special addition. This is not a rigid formula followed by every household, but it reflects a broader, common pattern in traditional Japanese eating. The mechanism worth understanding here involves your gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive system that influence digestion, inflammation, and even how your body processes and stores fat. Research increasingly suggests that a more diverse gut microbiome, supported by fiber-rich vegetables and fermented foods, is associated with better metabolic health markers, while diets low in fiber and fermented foods are linked to reduced microbial diversity. Fermented foods introduce beneficial bacteria strains, while the fiber in vegetables feeds and supports the bacteria your gut already has. This does not guarantee weight loss on its own, but it can support a healthier internal environment that may make weight management somewhat easier over time. The shift here does not require an overhaul of your entire diet or unfamiliar ingredients. Vegetables do not need to be Japanese vegetables specifically. Fermented foods do not need to be imported. Plain yogurt with live cultures, sauerkraut, or kimchi can serve a similar function if miso or Japanese pickles are not accessible where you live. The principle matters more than the specific product. Start with one small action tomorrow. At your next meal, increase the vegetable portion until it takes up roughly half your plate. And if you have any fermented food available, even a small spoonful, add it as a side rather than skipping it. It is worth being clear about what this habit is not claiming. Vegetables and fermented foods are not a magic category that melts fat on their own, and no single ingredient works in isolation from the rest of your diet. What they appear to do, based on current research, is support a more diverse and resilient gut environment, which may make consistent, moderate eating easier to sustain over the long term, rather than triggering the rapid blood sugar swings that often follow meals built primarily around refined carbohydrates. The value of this habit is cumulative, not immediate, which is exactly why it works better as a daily default than as an occasional trend you try for a week and abandon. If cost or access is a concern, this habit does not require expensive specialty ingredients. Frozen or seasonal vegetables work as well as fresh ones nutritionally. A jar of sauerkraut, or a container of plain yogurt with live active cultures, both widely available and inexpensive, can serve a similar fermentation role to miso or Japanese pickles if those are harder to find where you live. The principle, more plants, more fermented variety, matters far more than any specific brand or origin. We have covered what goes into your body and how it moves through your day. But the next habit is the one that surprises people most because it has almost nothing to do with food or exercise at all. Number 4, prioritizing sleep and stress management as seriously as diet. This is where the Japanese approach becomes genuinely useful and where most people resist because it goes against a deeply ingrained belief that weight is purely a matter of eating less and moving more. Here is the overlooked mechanism. Cortisol is one of the hormones that helps your body become alert and respond to stress. In short bursts, it is useful and necessary. But when stress becomes chronic, whether from poor sleep, constant work pressure, or an overstimulated nervous system, cortisol can remain elevated for extended periods. Elevated cortisol over time is associated with increased fat storage, specifically around the abdomen, more so than in other areas of the body. This is one possible explanation for why some people can eat carefully and still struggle with stubborn belly fat, while their stress levels remain consistently high. Poor sleep compounds this further. Sleep deprivation is associated with disruptions to the hormones ghrelin and leptin, which regulate hunger and satiety. When sleep is insufficient, ghrelin, the hormone that signals hunger, tends to rise, while leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, tends to fall. The practical result is that a tired body often feels hungrier than it actually is and less satisfied after eating than it should be. Many Japanese cultural practices place real value on rest, stillness, and stress reduction as legitimate parts of daily life, not as luxuries reserved for vacation. The concept of seijaku, a sense of stillness or tranquility, reflects this. Quiet, unhurried moments are treated as valuable in their own right, not as unproductive time to feel guilty about. Similarly, Shinrin-yoku, often translated as forest bathing, describes the simple practice of spending unhurried time in nature, which research associates with measurable reductions in cortisol levels and markers of stress. You do not need access to a forest to benefit from this principle. The mechanism behind Shinrin-yoku is largely about slow, unhurried time away from screens and demands, and elements of that can be recreated in a nearby park, a quiet backyard, or even a slow walk without your phone. The practical action here has two parts. First, treat 7 to 8 hours of sleep as a non-negotiable health habit with the same seriousness you might treat a meal plan. Set a consistent bedtime this week, even if it means ending your evening 10 minutes earlier than feels comfortable at first. Second, build in 10 to 15 minutes of genuinely unhurried time each day without your phone, without a task attached to it. This is not indulgence, it is a direct intervention on a hormone that is scientifically linked to abdominal fat storage. Let that idea land for a moment. You cannot out-exercise chronically elevated cortisol, and you cannot out-diet consistently poor sleep. This habit is not secondary to the others. For many people, it may be the missing piece that makes every other habit on this list actually work the way it is supposed to. This is also the habit most likely to be dismissed precisely because it does not feel like doing something. Sitting quietly for 10 minutes does not feel productive the way a workout does. Going to bed slightly earlier does not feel like progress the way a stricter diet does. But the biological reality is that a stressed, sleep-deprived body is working against almost every other effort you make, quietly raising hunger signals and directing more of what you eat toward abdominal storage. Regardless of how carefully you are otherwise eating or how consistently you are otherwise moving. If 10 to 15 minutes of unstructured quiet time feels difficult to imagine fitting into your day, start smaller. Even 5 minutes of sitting outside or lying down with your eyes closed and no phone nearby appears to offer measurable benefit over doing nothing at all. The goal is not perfection, it is simply giving your nervous system brief, regular permission to step out of alert mode several times a week rather than remaining switched on from the moment you wake until the moment you finally fall asleep. Number 5. Eating your last meal earlier and giving your body a genuine overnight break from digestion. In many modern households, dinner has drifted later and later into the evening, often followed by snacking in front of a screen right up until bedtime. The digestive system in this pattern rarely gets an extended period of true rest. In many traditional Japanese households, dinner tends to be eaten earlier in the evening with a longer gap before sleep and relatively little late-night snacking as a cultural default. This is not framed as intermittent fasting or a formal eating window. It is simply a long-standing rhythm. Eat earlier, then let the evening wind down without continuous food intake. The mechanism here connects to your body's internal clock, sometimes called your circadian rhythm, which governs not just sleep, but also aspects of digestion and metabolism. Research suggests that eating late at night, particularly foods high in refined carbohydrates, may be associated with less favorable blood sugar responses compared to eating the same food earlier in the day, when your body's insulin sensitivity tends to be higher. Over time, this pattern is one possible contributor to increased fat storage for some people, alongside total calorie intake and other factors. There is also a simpler, more immediate consequence worth mentioning. Eating close to bedtime can interfere with the ability to fall into deep, restorative sleep for some people, which loops directly back to the cortisol and hunger hormone disruption discussed a moment ago. These 5 habits are not isolated from each other, they reinforce or undermine one another throughout the day. The practical shift does not require a rigid fasting schedule or skipping meals. Start by moving your final meal earlier by even 30 to 60 minutes from your current habit and aim to leave a genuine gap, ideally 2 to 3 hours, between your last bite of food and the moment you go to sleep. If evening hunger strikes, a small amount of water or herbal tea can often bridge the gap without requiring a full snack. Try this tonight. If dinner is still ahead of you, eat it slightly earlier than usual and notice how your body feels heading into sleep compared to a typical night. This habit is often the hardest to adjust for people with late work schedules, and it is worth saying clearly. The goal is not a rigid cutoff time that creates its own stress if you miss it occasionally. The goal is a general pattern, most nights, rather than a strict rule every single night. If your schedule genuinely requires a later dinner, the same underlying principle still applies in a smaller way. Favor a lighter, less carbohydrate-heavy meal in the evening, and give yourself as much of a gap before sleep as your schedule realistically allows, even if it is shorter than the 2 to 3 hours mentioned earlier. Some buffer is better than none, and consistency over time matters more than any single perfect night. Let's bring these 5 ideas together because individually each one is small. Together they form a coherent daily rhythm, and that rhythm is really the point. Here is a simple framework you can start tomorrow, with no special equipment and no cost. Call it the reset rhythm, and it follows the natural order of your day. Morning, building one small walk, even 5 to 10 minutes, ideally outdoors, without your phone occupying your attention the entire time. Midday, at your largest meal, Fill roughly half the plate with vegetables, and practice stopping at around 80% full rather than eating until the plate is empty. Afternoon. Find one natural opportunity to move that you would normally avoid: stairs instead of an elevator, a short walk instead of a short drive. Evening. Eat your final meal a little earlier than usual and set aside 10 to 15 minutes of unhurried, screen free time before winding down for consistent, adequate sleep. That is the entire rhythm. 4 checkpoints, spaced naturally across a day you are already living. You do not need to change your whole life to feel the difference. You only need to change the order in which a few small things happen and let your body respond to a more consistent, less chaotic pattern over time. Same Life, Different Belly was never really about a secret food or a hidden exercise. It was about a rhythm, repeated quietly, day after day, until the body simply responds differently to it. Tonight, choose just one of these 5 habits and start there. Not all 5 at once, one. Which habit surprised you the most? The meal timing, the walking, the fermented foods, or the sleep and stress connection? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and I am genuinely curious which idea changes how you think about your own routine. If this video gave you a new way to think about your body and your daily rhythm, subscribe to the Japanese Reset for more small Japanese ideas that create meaningful, lasting change. And if you know someone who has been chasing quick fixes without seeing real results, share this with them. Sometimes the answer was never a stricter diet, it was a steadier rhythm. The useful lesson was never that Japan has solved weight loss perfectly. It is that a slower, more consistent daily rhythm can quietly succeed where intensity and restriction have repeatedly failed. Start with one small shift tomorrow morning. The rest of the rhythm will follow.